In 1919, a serial killer in New Orleans sent a letter to the local paper claiming to be a demon from the hottest hell. He promised to murder more people that Tuesday night, but said he'd spare anyone playing jazz. The city complied. Dance halls overflowed. Bands played in living rooms until dawn. Here are 21 facts that prove Louisiana is completely unhinged. His name was the Axeman, and between 1918 and 1919, he broke into homes in New Orleans, chiseled a panel out of the back door, and hacked sleeping families to death with their own axes. When he wrote to the Times-Picayune, he claimed he would pass over the city at 12:15 on the morning of March 19th, and swore by all the devils in hell that any home playing a jazz band at that moment would be spared. That night, every musician in New Orleans was booked. People who didn't own instruments hired musicians to sit in their living rooms. Dance halls were packed to the walls. No one was attacked, he was never caught, and the killings stopped as suddenly as they began. In 1834, a fire at a mansion on Royal Street in New Orleans exposed a torture chamber in the attic. Delphine LaLaurie, a wealthy socialite who hosted lavish parties downstairs, had spent years mutilating the people she enslaved in the rooms above. Firefighters found 7 survivors chained, starving, and horribly disfigured. The cook was chained to the stove. She had set the fire herself to escape. When word spread, a mob of 4,000 people ransacked the house. LaLaurie fled to Paris and was never prosecuted. In the predominantly black town of St. Gabriel, surrounded by 18 petrochemical plants within a 5-mile radius, a local pharmacist started keeping a list in 1983. She was tracking miscarriages. Over the next 5 years, she estimated that roughly 1 in every 3 pregnancies on a single stretch of road ended in miscarriage. The state never formally investigated. The plants kept expanding. In 1946, a 17-year-old named Willie Francis was strapped into Louisiana's portable electric chair. The switch was pulled. Witnesses said he screamed and jerked against the straps, but he didn't die. The chair had been set up by a drunk prison guard working alongside an inmate. They had wired it wrong. After Willie survived, his lawyers argued that sending him back to the chair would be cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment. The Supreme Court disagreed by 1 vote, 5-4. A year later, Louisiana strapped him back into the same chair and killed him on the second try. In August 2012, the ground in the town of Bayou Corne started shaking. Bubbles rose from the bayou. Residents smelled crude oil in the air. An underground salt cavern operated by a drilling company had collapsed thousands of feet below. What followed was a sinkhole that swallowed 37 acres of swamp, trees, and land, triggered earthquakes for months, and kept belching oil and methane gas. A state judge later ruled that the company had ignored warnings about the cavern's instability dating back to 1976, putting economic concerns over environmental and safety concerns. It's still growing today. Most of the town never came back. In 1991, Louisiana's governor's race came down to a former 4-term governor under federal indictment for corruption and a former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. That was the choice. Voters had to pick. One of the winning campaign's unofficial slogans, printed on actual bumper stickers sold across the state, read, "Vote for the crook." It's important. The crook won in a landslide. Less than a decade later, he went to federal prison for racketeering tied to riverboat casino licenses. 2 men held at Angola prison, Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace, were kept in solitary confinement for over 40 years each, locked in a 6-by-9-foot cell, 23 hours a day, for 4 decades. It is the longest period of solitary confinement in American history. The United Nations classifies anything beyond 15 days as torture. Wallace was released 3 days before he died of cancer. Woodfox walked free on his 69th birthday, having spent more of his life in a concrete box than outside of one. In 1980, a Texaco drilling crew working on a small freshwater lake called Lake Penure miscalculated by a matter of feet and drilled straight through the roof of a working salt mine 1,400 feet below. The fresh lake water hit the salt and started dissolving the pillars holding up the mine. The lake began to drain. A whirlpool opened on the surface big enough to suck down the drilling platform, 11 barges, 65 acres of land, and an entire botanical garden. The nearby canal reversed direction and poured in from the Gulf, creating the tallest waterfall in Louisiana history at 164 feet. When it was over, the lake had gone from 10 feet deep to 200. In 2005, FBI agents searching the home of Louisiana Congressman William Jefferson found $90,000 in cash hidden in his freezer, not in a safe, not in a bag, wrapped in aluminum foil and stuffed inside Pillsbury pie crust boxes and Boca Burger containers tucked between frozen meals. He was convicted of bribery and sentenced to 13 years, the longest prison sentence ever handed to a member of Congress. The stretch of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans is 85 miles long. Along it sit more than 200 petrochemical plants, producing roughly a quarter of all petrochemicals made in the United States. They were built on top of former slave plantations, and the black communities living next to them, descendants of the people once enslaved there, breathe emissions at rates up to 21 times higher than nearby white neighborhoods. It's called Cancer Alley. Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the United States, sits on 18,000 acres of former slave plantation named after the African country most of the enslaved came from. It's bigger than the island of Manhattan. As of recent data, roughly 74% of the men held there are serving life sentences, about 4 are paroled per year, about 32 die inside per year. Most will be buried on the grounds. For most of the past 25 years, Louisiana has locked up a higher percentage of its residents than any independent democratic country on earth. The current rate is 1,067 people per 100,000 residents, roughly 10 times the rate of Germany, 7 times the rate of China, and 3 times the rate of Brazil. Louisiana also incarcerates women at a higher rate than nearly any country on the planet. And almost half the people sitting in Louisiana jails right now have not been convicted of a crime. They are legally innocent. In 1803, the United States bought 828,000 square miles of land from France, roughly 530 million acres. The price came to about 3 cents an acre. It remains the largest land purchase in American history, and it doubled the size of the country overnight. Napoleon sold it because he needed the cash for his wars in Europe. The Americans were only authorized to buy the port of New Orleans. Since the 1930s, Louisiana has lost over 2,000 square miles of land to open water, an area the size of Delaware. A football field's worth of coastal wetlands still vanishes every 100 minutes. Levying the Mississippi cut off the sediment that built the delta for millennia, and oil company canals slice the marshes into ribbons. Without intervention, the state is projected to lose another 4,000 square miles in the next 50 years. Between 2002 and 2011, Louisiana racked up the highest federal public corruption conviction rate of any state in the country, 9 per 100,000 residents. 3 of the last 4 Louisiana insurance commissioners went to prison. Former Representative Billy Towson liked to say that half of Louisiana is underwater and the other half is under indictment. He was not exaggerating. Every Sunday in October and one weekend in April, Angola Prison hosts a professional rodeo. Thousands of tourists pay to watch untrained inmates compete in events like convict poker. 4 men seated at a card table in the middle of the arena, while a 2,000-pound bull is released to knock them off their chairs. The last man sitting wins. In the grand finale, Guts and Glory, a poker chip is tied between a bull's horns and prisoners chase it for cash. Angola inmates earn between 2 cents and 75 cents an hour, so the prize money is real incentive to get gored. The European press has called it second only to the running of the bulls. It's been running since 1965. Governor Edwin Edwards served 8 years in federal prison for racketeering tied to casino licenses. He was released at 83. He promptly married a 32-year-old woman who had written to him in prison. 2 years later, at 86, he fathered a son with her. Then he ran for Congress. Louisiana is the only state in America whose legal system isn't based on English common law. It runs on civil law, traceable to French and Spanish colonial codes, and the Napoleonic Code. That's why Louisiana has parishes instead of counties. It's why judges there rule on interpretation of written statutes rather than precedent. And it's why Louisiana has legal terms found nowhere else in the country: usufruct, forced heirship, liberative prescription. In New Orleans, there is a law on the books making it illegal to tie an alligator to a fire hydrant. Not illegal to own an alligator. Not illegal to walk one down the street, specifically illegal to tie it to a fire hydrant. And under state law, stealing someone else's alligator can land you up to 10 years in prison and a $3,000 fine. Louisiana state law specifically bans ingesting blood or other bodily fluids during any kind of ritual. The penalty is up to 25 years in prison and a $25,000 fine. The law exists because lawmakers looked at New Orleans and decided this needed to be spelled out. And if you bite someone in Louisiana while wearing dentures, those dentures are legally considered a deadly weapon, and you can be charged with aggravated battery. No other state has a denture clause. No other state needed one, which tells you just about everything you need to know about Louisiana. Louisiana doesn't have scandals. Louisiana has a scandal economy. Every governor, every decade, every disaster, somebody's getting rich while somebody else is drowning, burning, or serving life. Which one of these did you already know, and which one sent you to Google it? Next up, New York is unhinged.